My name is Shelby, and my late husband Antonio was the greatest blessing in my life. Long story short, he tragically passed away in a motorcycle accident exactly 8 years ago, as I'm writing this on April 29, 2016. What I'm about to share with you is something I've suppressed for years, but I believe I'm finally ready to open up about it. Antonio and I both grew up in Italy. English is actually my second language. He always dreamed of visiting Greece, but we kept delaying the trip. One of my deepest regrets is not taking time off work one summer to go with him. In late spring of 2018, I finally decided to take the plunge and embark on the trip he had always dreamed of. Being 36 years old with no children, the idea of traveling alone didn't exactly appeal to me, so I booked a cruise, thinking it would be a more relaxing experience. To my luck, Celebrity Cruise Line had a Best of Greece tour, visiting 6 cities: Athens, Santorini, Ephesus, Mykonos, Volos, Thessaloniki, and returning to Athens. I tried my best to feel excited about the trip, knowing it was what Antonio would have wanted, but I couldn't shake a melancholy feeling. It just felt wrong to be there without him. I'll admit, I probably indulged in too much wine on that first night after we left Athens, but I figured I was entitled to let loose a bit. After wandering the city's sights, I found myself at a nameless bar, drinking martini after martini. That's when I noticed him. Across the bar, a man in his 40s with long brown hair and an unruly beard. He wasn't unattractive, but something about his stare was deeply unsettling. At first I dismissed it, thinking he was just a lonely guy who might have found me attractive. But after catching his gaze a few more times, I felt a creeping unease. His stare wasn't flirtatious or charming. It was cold, almost like he was trying to bore a hole into my face with his eyes. After what felt like my 8th drink, I paid my tab and hurried back to the dock. By that night, the memory of him had faded. The next stop was Ephesus. My time there was spent similarly, drinking far more than was appropriate for someone my age. Aside from some fleeting guilt, everything seemed fine. But Mykonos was next, and I'm sure you can guess what happened. Toward the end of the day, I found myself sitting alone at an outdoor bar when I spotted him again. He was leaning against a light fixture with his arms crossed. I squinted, hoping my mind was playing tricks on me, but there was no mistaking it. It was the man from Santorini. He was too far away for me to tell if he was looking directly at me, but his head was tilted in my direction. Strangely, he was wearing the same clothes he had on in Santorini. A wave of discomfort washed over me. Was I being followed? My hands began to sweat, and I rubbed them on my dress nervously as I lowered my head, trying to avoid looking at him. But even from a distance I could feel his presence. I glanced back up, but he was gone. Oddly, instead of feeling relieved, I grew even more anxious. I scanned the area, wondering if he had gotten closer. I didn't feel safe walking back to the boat alone, so I struck up small talk with a couple that was leaving the bar and walked with them instead. That night, rather than retreating to my stateroom, I wandered the ship, hoping to spot the strange man again. I searched the entire ship until midnight, but found no trace of him. The next morning, we docked in Volos, and I was determined to get to the bottom of this mystery. Instead of venturing into the city, I stayed by the gangway, carefully watching as every passenger disembarked. I didn't miss a single person, but he never appeared. Frustrated, I spent the rest of the day lounging by the pool. Thessaloniki was the final city on the itinerary. As much as I dreaded it, I knew I would be wasting my vacation if I stayed on the boat, so I reluctantly disembarked and tried to enjoy the city. Feeling superstitious, I decided to avoid bars and alcohol this time, which I managed to do. I wandered aimlessly, admiring the architecture and soaking in the weather. Then, as if on cue, there he was again. He stood several streets away in the middle of the road, his arms at his sides. But instead of fear, I was overcome with a surge of adrenaline and newfound confidence. I shouted at him and started walking toward him. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and ran. It was bizarre. I chased him, rounding corner after corner, but when I turned the last one, he was gone, vanished as if into thin air. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was relieved when we finally docked in Athens, but even after returning home, I couldn't shake the memory of that man. Determined to make sense of it, I opened my laptop and began researching. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I thought recent police reports might be a good place to start. After finding nothing, I stumbled upon some missing persons listings. As I scrolled through the pages, my heart stopped. There, in the middle of the page, was a missing persons notice for a man who looked almost identical to the one who had been following me. I stared at the photo in disbelief. But what really shook me was his name. It was Antonio, the same name as my late husband. I immediately called the police to report what I had seen. The operator thanked me and put me on hold. When she returned, she asked if I was absolutely certain about what I had seen. I said yes. After an uncomfortable pause, she informed me that the case had been closed just over a month ago. Apparently, that man had been found dead in a boating accident off the coast of Parga, Greece. But here's the truly sinister part. The date of his confirmed death was the exact same as my husband's accident. 2 years later, I hung up the phone, shaking uncontrollably. I've never been more terrified in my life. I felt lightheaded, questioning my sanity. Had I imagined everything? And then, another realization hit me. The only city where I hadn't seen him, Ephesus, was in Turkey, not Greece. I don't believe in the paranormal, but no logical explanation can account for what I saw. Last summer, my niece Maria had her wedding in Athens, and I had no choice but to attend. And just like clockwork, I saw him again. Only for a brief second this time, he stood by a bar, in the same outfit, his head tilted toward me. There were so many drunk people around, though, that I might have imagined it. Either way, I vowed never to set foot in Greece again. I'm a senior at Rowan University in South Jersey. My friends like to call me Devin. Last summer, I went on a Bahamas cruise with a few of my girlfriends to blow off some steam. We had just turned 21, so our main goals for this trip were to drink some more, and just have fun. After dealing with all the drama in Greek life and schoolwork during a grueling semester, we all felt like we truly deserved this vacation. To keep it brief, I was with my friends Taur, Messina, and Taylor. Taylor and I didn't always get along. There was some petty drama between us, and I always felt like she was a little envious of me. I mean, she didn't work out much and spent a lot of time eating, so you get what I'm hinting at. But I was really close to Taur and Messina, so I figured everything would go smoothly. We booked our cruise through Carnival, and it was heading to a few islands in the Bahamas before returning to New York City. Our first stop was Paradise Island. To cut to the chase, all four of us ended up getting pretty drunk at the bar. We were laughing, flirting with guys to get free drinks, and honestly, it was a lot of fun. At one point, Messina asked me to grab her another drink, so I went to the bar to get it. Messina followed me, and when the drinks came, I wanted to snap a selfie with her before we headed back to the table. I pulled out my phone and took a couple of selfies with the drinks. Just as I was doing that, Taur called Messina over. In her drunken state, she ran off, leaving her drink behind. I didn't want someone to take it, so I left my phone on the bar, grabbed her drink along with mine, and joined the others, teasing Messina for being so forgetful. Pretty soon, it was time to head back to the boat. The moment the boat set sail, I started panicking. I had left my phone at the bar. I felt like such an idiot. Losing my phone on the first day? I started crying, thinking it had ruined the whole trip. I wanted to jump overboard out of frustration. I pulled out my laptop and used it to track my phone's location. To my surprise, it wasn't on the island, but somewhere on the boat. The location wasn't super precise, but I felt some relief knowing it was nearby. I rushed to Lost and Found, hoping someone had turned it in, but no luck. No one had returned a phone, and all the relief I felt earlier disappeared. Why would someone take my phone if they didn't plan to return it? I went back to my friends and vented about it. Taur told me not to stress and to try to enjoy the rest of the trip, which I did. For the next day, I didn't think about my phone at all, and I was pretty proud of myself for that. You don't realize how much time you spend on your phone until it's gone. I kept reaching for it to check social media or take selfies, only to remember it wasn't there. The following day, I was at the front of the boat and, out of curiosity, decided to check my phone's location again. To my surprise, it showed up right on top of me. I looked around, but there were so many people, it could have been anyone. I told my friends, and they were just as shocked, except for Taylor, who was trying to hold back laughter. That really ticked me off. A few hours later, we were at the arcade, messing around with games. I checked my phone's location again, and once more, it showed up as being right on top of me. Now I was furious. Whoever had my phone was following me around the boat, and I was convinced it was Taylor. I confronted her, showing her the evidence on my laptop. She denied everything, saying it wasn't her fault I was dumb enough to lose my phone in the first place. Things escalated quickly, and we ended up screaming at each other. I made her empty her pockets and her purse, but my phone wasn't there. She called me an idiot again and smirked, and I stormed off in tears. I spent the rest of the day alone in my room, refusing to hang out with Taylor for the remainder of the night. The next 2 days passed by quickly. I stayed away from Taylor the whole time and kept checking my phone's location, hoping for some kind of breakthrough. Then, something weird happened. When I returned to my room one night, I found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a handwritten letter from someone named Bart Vinsky. He claimed to have found my phone unlocked, gone through it, and realized how attractive I was. He went on to confess his love for me. The letter was short, but I felt totally grossed out. Some random creep had full access to my phone and knew which room I was staying in. I immediately reported it to security, but they were no help. Thankfully, that creep Bart didn't try to contact me again, and the cruise ended. Taylor and I eventually made up, and the 4 of us parted ways. I wish I could say that was the end of it. That night, after my dad drove me home, I stayed up late watching reality TV on my laptop. It suddenly hit me. Why not check my phone's location now? I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of that sooner. I pulled it up and waited for it to load. When the map finally appeared, I froze. The little blue dot was showing up right on top of my house. My blood ran cold. I screamed, waking up my family. My dad rushed into my room and, after realizing what was happening, sprinted outside barefoot with his hunting rifle. I followed closely behind. My dad fired a shot into the air and shouted at the top of his lungs. Just then, a guy jumped over our side gate and bolted down the street. My dad considered chasing him, but decided not to. We walked around the back of the house, and what we saw made my heart stop. One of my dad's ladders was propped against the side of the house, directly underneath my bedroom window. Worse, the little wooden latch on the window had almost been cut all the way through. If I had fallen asleep without checking my phone's location, I might not be here telling this story. We filed a police report, and it's been about 2 weeks since the incident. Thankfully, nothing else has happened, but I'm still struggling to sleep at night, knowing that creep has access to all my personal information. My photos, my contacts, my address. My phone's been deactivated, but who knows what kind of data he was able to get. I'll update if anything else happens. This might sound strange to some of you, but I've always had this dream of being a bartender on a cruise ship. I can't fully explain why, but life at sea just feels like it would be so peaceful to me. Plus, I guess you could say I'm a social butterfly, and I've always thought the people you meet on cruises have the most fascinating stories. A few years back, I actually made that dream come true. As a cheerful woman in my mid-20s, with a couple of years of bartending experience under my belt, I sailed through the interview process. Royal Caribbean brought me on board as a bartender, and things got off to a fantastic start. I won't bore you with all the irrelevant details about my time there, but what you need to know is that this job came with a lot of travel. Sometimes too much. After just 2 tours, I had interacted with 3 times the number of people I'd served in my local bar over 2 months. The sheer volume of passengers was overwhelming, but that was part of the appeal for me when I sought this job in the first place. This story takes place during my 3rd tour, a 12-day transatlantic cruise from Miami to Portugal and Spain. It was a long journey, and we were at sea for 5 days straight. However, there was a silver lining. I'd soon be back in Europe, and Royal Caribbean might even give me some time off to visit my family in Lyon. Now, let me preface this by saying that I'm no stranger to dealing with drunk, overly flirtatious men trying to buy me drinks. young, old, handsome, or not. It's just part of the job when you work nights. But during this particular cruise, one customer stood out from the rest. This tall, attractive guy, probably in his 30s, kept catching my eye every night. He'd find a seat at my bar and nurse his drinks slowly, night after night. Eventually, we struck up a conversation about our lives, and he was always the last customer to leave at the end of the night. For the first time in a while, I found myself looking forward to those late nights when Sebastian, yes, that's what he said his name was, would hang out at my bar. There was something about his light green eyes. They seemed to hold some deeper sorrow, a sadness etched into his features. On the third night, I managed to get him to open up, and what he shared was downright heartbreaking. He reluctantly told me about his troubled marriage, pausing often like he was weighing every word. His wife, Sasha, had been having an affair with his best friend from college, Charles. I won't get into all the details, but it sounded brutal. There were a lot of specifics. He even told me their full names, like he had been holding on to this for years, waiting for someone to vent to. He went on to say that he'd boarded the cruise alone, hoping the vastness of the sea would help him forget his pain. I didn't really know how to respond, other than to keep refilling his glass. The night before we were scheduled to dock in Ponta Delgada, Sebastian expressed his gratitude for my company. "You've made this trip bearable," he admitted. Then, he offered to buy me a drink to show his thanks. I'd been offered drinks before, but this time felt different. I had developed a genuine connection with him, and it seemed unfair what he had gone through. So I agreed. Normally I'd pour my own drink, but he insisted on doing it himself, saying it was the polite and fair thing to do. I should have stuck to professional boundaries, but his insistence, combined with his apparent vulnerability, got to me. Reluctantly, I allowed him behind the bar, a decision that might have changed my life. He mixed the drink, his hand steady, and handed it to me with a small, sad smile. The drink tasted fine, but within minutes, a heavy drowsiness clouded my senses. I tried to grab the edge of the bar for support, but everything went black before I could even scream. When I woke up, what I saw was terrifying. I was in my own room, but it looked like a tornado had torn through it. Panic surged through me as I realized I was tied to my bed with a towel stuffed in my mouth. A wave of relief washed over me when I noticed that my clothes were still intact and untouched. An hour later, room service found me and untied me. By that time, it had been a full day, and we were already pulling out of Jamaica. More than anything, I was angry. Angry at myself for being so naive. I had fallen for Sebastian's charming act, and he had taken advantage of my sympathy. I doubted that Sebastian was even his real name. My suite, as I mentioned, was a mess. My jewelry, phone, and personal belongings were gone. The safe was open, and everything inside was missing. Even my suitcase had vanished. The ship's security team took the matter very seriously, though not in front of the passengers, of course. They reviewed the footage and found that this guy had disembarked early in Ponta Delgada and never returned to the ship. When he didn't show up at departure time, they had no choice but to leave him behind. The crew urged me to keep quiet about the incident, offering substantial compensation and promising they'd find him eventually. After all, he must have used a passport to book the cruise. Weeks after the trip, they contacted me to update me on the investigation. Since the cruise hadn't yet returned to the US, getting American police involved was a nightmare. Portugal was somewhat cooperative, conducting a search, but I knew there was no way Sebastian was still in Portugal. Eventually, the US got involved, launching a full-scale investigation. The identity this man had used was real. Real passport, real name, real address. The authorities visited his supposed residence, but the landlord said Sebastian had moved just over a month ago, leaving nothing behind. They did have his personal phone number, but it had been disconnected. The police checked his criminal history, which was spotless. He didn't even have a parking ticket. They visited his previous jobs, all of which told the same story. Nothing useful. There was no property in his name and no new contact information. I was furious. They had his full identity. How could there be nothing more they could do? You might think the story ends there, but you'd be wrong. I took a leave of absence from Royal Caribbean, hoping to distance myself from the ordeal. But the situation only escalated. About a month later, I received the first one, a blank envelope with a single photograph inside. It was a picture of me walking to my car after grocery shopping. I wanted to scream. A week later, I got the second one, a candid shot of me shopping at the mall. At first, I tried to ignore the pictures, but they kept coming. One after another, each envelope contained a photo of me, completely unaware I was being watched. I can't explain the terror I lived in during those weeks. I was too afraid to leave my house. I couldn't work, hang out with friends, or even go shopping without constantly looking over my shoulder. After the sixth envelope, I finally went to the police. You're probably wondering why I didn't go after the first one, but honestly, I can't answer that. The police didn't seem to know what to do. They opened a case, but I knew it wasn't going anywhere. Then one night, I heard knocks on my bedroom window. I knew it was him. The police came, found nothing, and left, leaving me even more terrified than before. I'd had enough. I moved to a new apartment immediately, left no forwarding address, changed all my contact details, and increased my security measures as much as possible. Thankfully, I haven't heard from him again. It's only been 3 months, though, so I hope I'm not jinxing myself by putting this into words. I'm fairly certain he unlocked my phone while I was unconscious, which is how he was able to steal my information. The worst part of all of this isn't the stolen belongings, or even the fact that my life was uprooted when I moved. The worst part is that I'll never dream of working on a cruise ship again. I don't even know if I want to keep bartending. It's crazy how quickly a lifelong dream can turn into a nightmare.